So at this point, our tile map editor is basically done, but you may notice some weird graphic issues inside of the tile map itself. As you can see here, there appear to be lines in between some of the tiles. This issue may appear worse depending on how far in you zoom onto your artwork. This is a common problem when dealing with 2D artwork inside of a 3D engine. The reason for this is that all of our sprite tiles are actually lined up next to each other inside of our texture. So when the GPU goes to sample our sprite, it actually oversamples a little bit of the texture next to it. Some texture packers can fix this problem by packing the texture in a way where there's padding in between each of the tiles and extending some of the pixels into the padding so that we don't see these issues. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do this by hand so that we can see immediately how to fix this kind of problem in our own game. Let's go into the artwork folder and right-click on our dorm tiles. Next, we're going to select Reveal in Finder. Then, we'll open this up in Photoshop or your image editor of choice. Now I'm going to zoom in. Here you can see each of the tiles are 16 by 16, and I have Photoshop's grid on. What we're going to do is add padding in between each of the tiles. To do this, let's go ahead and resize the canvas. We'll go to Image and select Canvas Size. We'll anchor it to the top right, and we're going to change the canvas to 144 by 36. In essence, what we're going to do is make the tiles 18 by 18. This means that a single 16 by 16 tile will have 1 pixel of padding around its edges. Now I'm going to illustrate how we're going to move this over. First, let's select the bottom row of tiles and move them down so that there is 1 pixel at the bottom. Next, we're going to start with the tiles at the very far end, and we're going to move them over until there is 1 pixel at the very end. Let's select the second to last column of tiles. We're going to move it all the way over to the last set of tiles. But once we're there, let's move it over 2 spaces. We're going to continue this process, making sure that each column of tile has 2 pixel spaces between them. Once you get to the end, simply move it over 1 pixel, and now all of our tiles should have a padding of 2 in between them. The last thing we need to do is select the top row of tiles and move them down 1. Now let's go into Photoshop's Preferences and go into the Guides, Grids, and Slice options. Let's go ahead and change the grid to 18. Now you'll see each of our tiles is centered inside of an 18 by 18 cell. Now let's zoom in and start on the first tile. We're going to select the first row of pixels, and while holding down Option and Command, we're going to drag them up. Let's do this for all of the edges and expand the edge of our tile out to its border so that we wind up with a 16 by 16 tile. I'm going to go ahead and do this for all of the tiles in our sprite sheet. And now I've gone ahead and turned all of our 16 by 16 tiles into 18 by 18 tiles. Now, when we use them in the game, they're still going to be 16 by 16. We're just making sure that we have enough pixel data around the edges of our tiles that we don't see any artifacts. Now let's take a look at how to use this inside of our game. Now we already have a tile map built with the existing tiles. Inside of your exercise folder is a Resources Optimized folder. Let's now navigate to the current texture that we're using inside of our project. And we're going to drag the Resources Optimized on top of it, overriding the texture. Once you've done this, go back into Unity, and now you'll see our texture is a little bit distorted. And that's because we're using the old size for each of the tiles. With our texture selected, let's go back into the sprite editor. We're going to select the slice option and go to grid by cell. From here, we're going to change this to 16 by 16 like we had before, but now we're going to change the offset to 1 by 1 and the padding to 2 by 2. Now let's hit slice and then hit apply. As you can see, our 16 by 16 tiles are now being cut out of our image, even though each of the tiles appear to be 18 by 18. Let's close the editor and take a look at our tile map. As you can see, everything has been restored back to normal. If we zoom in and out, you'll no longer see the distortion. And now our tile map has been fixed. This technique works for any type of sprite sheet you're using inside of Unity. If you're doing something with characters or something that has transparency, you can simply do a padding around each of the sprites in the sprite sheet and just leave the padding between each of the sprites as transparent, and you won't see any artifacts. Anytime two sprites match up next to each other inside of a sprite sheet, you're going to want to make sure that there's padding and that the sprite itself either extends to the edge of its padding with the same color as its border, or transparent if the majority of the sprite is transparent around its edges. The only thing that won't work now is our tile picker, since it still thinks that our tiles are 16 by 16. We'll fix that next.